can't agree with it whatsoever. Now, JJ said, I do agree with it. I don't agree with it, and I'll tell you why. Because NATO are not an aggressive organisation, but we know that Russia is an aggressive organisation because they went into Crimea, they went into Georgia, and we didn't stop them, so we should have known that he's not going to stop, he's going to go somewhere else. We had every right then to strengthen the NATO borders, to start sabre-rattling and saying, you go no further. Once we did that, then Putin invoked, what he always invokes is, they're all after us. They're going to come and attack us. They're going to invade us. You've got to remember, and if you read into the history of what Putin's all about, he's the former head of the KGB. And he said the worst day of his life was when the Berlin Wall fell and the Russian Soviet Empire fell apart. He was determined from that moment on to put it back together again.
Yeah, right. We are not aggressive, while shouting at the top of his voice. This is how Western mainstream media has been selling fiction to their citizens instead of facts as news. What is this journalist saying? How can this chap look at the track record of the US and other NATO countries and claim they are not aggressive? How laughable. Hello and welcome again to the Edge of Politics podcast. Geopolitical Queen here with today's episode on the media meltdown about Nigel Farage telling the truth about the Western provocation of Russia's invasion in Ukraine. We seem to experience the how dare Nigel Farage speak the truth meltdown moment. What a shocking behavior from Mr. Farage. For the past 2 years, since the special military operation started in Ukraine, the Western mainstream media has done all it could to throw dust into our eyes. We are supposed to accept without reference to history and facts that the Tsar is evil. I have to use the title Tsar for President Putin as YouTube removes contents that don't speak evil of him or his country, RUSSIA, without the claim that it is against their community guidelines. But after 2 years of 50 collective Western countries fighting this one RUSSIA and getting nowhere, we are back to what Nigel Farage, the then leader of the UKIP group, warned the European Parliament about. So what did Nigel actually say back then?
You want to be Prime Minister. That's what you want to be. And this is, Europe is at war. Now, when the war happened, the big war, when Vladimir Putin sent his troops across the border in 22, you blamed the West, not him. You said, I'll just read it to you and then you can react, that on a tweet, it was a consequence of EU and NATO expansion. Is that a judgment you stand by?
Right. I'll tell you what, you don't know. I stood up in the European Parliament in 2014 and I said, and I quote, there will be a war in Ukraine. Why did I say that? It was obvious to me that the ever eastward expansion of NATO and the European Union was giving this man a reason to his Russian people to say they're coming for us again and to go to war.
But you were echoing him.
I was, sorry.
You were echoing him. That's what Putin says.
No. Sorry, I've been saying this actually since the 1990s. Ever since the fall of the wall. But hang on a second. We've provoked this war. It's, of course it's his fault. He's used what
But
we've done
we
as an
provoked
excuse.
the invasion of
Yes,
Ukraine.
and very interestingly, once again, 10 years ago when I predicted this, by the way, I'm the only person in British politics that predicted what would happen.
A decade later, he says this too, and the Western mainstream media are having a meltdown with a claim that the public are angry. How could any discerning public be angry with what Nigel said when he was only speaking the truth? Just take a listen.
The next speaker will be Honourable Farage, EFDR. 2 minutes.
Amongst the long list of foreign policy failures and contradictions in the last few years, including of course the bombing of Libya, the desire to arm the rebels in Syria, has been the unnecessary provocation of Vladimir Putin. This EU empire, ever seeking to expand, stated its territorial claim on the Ukraine some years ago. Just to make that worse, of course, some NATO members said they too would like the Ukraine to join NATO. We directly encouraged the uprising in the Ukraine that led to the toppling of the President Yanukovych, and that led, of course, in turn to Vladimir Putin reacting. And the moral of the story is, if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, don't be surprised when he reacts. Now, just to continue with that, today we are rushing through an association agreement at undue speed with the Ukraine, and as we speak there are NATO soldiers engaged in military exercises in the Ukraine. Have we taken leave of our senses? Do we actually want to have a war with Putin? Because if we do, we are certainly going about it the right way. Perhaps we ought to recognise that the West now faces the biggest threat and crisis to our way of life that we have seen for over 70 years. The recent beheadings of the British and American hostages graphically illustrates the problem. And of course we have our own citizens from our own countries engaged in that struggle too. In the war against Islamic extremism, Vladimir Putin, whatever we may think of him as a human being, is actually on our side. I suggest we grow up. I suggest we recognise the real threat facing all of our countries, communities and societies. We stop playing war games in the Ukraine and we start to prepare a plan to help countries like Syria, like Iraq, like Kenya, like indeed Nigeria, to try and help them to deal with the real threat that faces us. Let's not go on provoking Putin, whether we like him or not.
So what did Nigel say so wrong in both instances? How dishonest and unprofessional can any interviewer be in the way this man is asking questions? In my humble opinion, it seems like it has become an unforgivable sin to retort facts in an election campaign. Well, we may not appreciate it, as the truth always hurts. But Nigel is spot on this time around. NATO and the European Union gave the Tsar the excuse he needed to invade another country. It is at least very refreshing to know that at least one politician out there has the balls to speak the truth. So what do you think? Was Nigel Farage stating the bleeding obvious? Or we are now in the democratic era where no one is allowed to have a view except the Western mainstream media? Well, kindly leave your comments in the comment section below, and thanks for tuning in. I will be back with the next broadcast. Good day.